Hi everyone, this is Marianne and welcome back to my channel. I hope you are enjoying the series so far. Today we are going to look at pen number 7 of the 12 pens of Christmas from Everything Calligraphy. Also remember to check out my review of the everythingcalligraphy.com online store, which I will link down below. Today we are going to look at the Noodler's Ahab Flex, and the color that I have with me is called the Plum Pearl. It comes in a basic white cardboard box, but the print that is on the box actually matches all of the prints that come in the boxes for the Noodler's inks. Noodlers is owned by Nathan Tardif, and I think it's a very interesting company. I'm a fan of Noodler's inks. Some of them are my staples, and I think Noodlers manufactures some of the most bizarre inks available out there. But this is the pen that we have, and it comes in a box that matches the box of the inks. And I will show you that other box later on, but for now, let's look at what's inside this particular box, one of which is the pen, and also this single page literature about the pen itself. There is a very interesting artwork on the front page of this single pager, and it is actually of Captain Ahab. As you can see, this is Captain Ahab of the Pequod, and that is Moby Dick in the background. The pen is named for Captain Ahab, and Ahab's leg is the pen. I think it's pretty amusing. On the other side of this piece of paper, we have here an explanation of the design of the pen. It explains the inspiration for the design of the clip. It is really based very heavily on the novel Moby Dick. It explains the nib and the filling system and the materials used to make the pen itself. The body and cap of the pen are made of a material called a celluloid derivative. And all of that is explained in this single pager right here that comes with the pen inside the box. And the filling system for this pen is very interesting. You can fill it in either of two ways. The first is as an eyedropper, and the second way is if you use the filling system that it actually comes with, and I will show you that later. Now let us have some close-up views of this pen. The clip is actually the same as how a sperm whale would look when we are viewing it from the top when it's swimming or gliding across the water, and that is the inspiration for this clip. The cap has a silver trim at the end, and it has the words Noodler's ink engraved on it. And the end of the barrel has that distinct shape because it represents peg leg of Captain Ahab, because he lost his leg to Moby Dick, and that's why he cannot stop looking for the whale, because he wants to exact revenge on the whale. And this is the nib. It's a flex nib. It does not have a breathing hole, but it has the words Noodler's Ink Co. engraved on it. This is going to be the very first time that I'm going to be trying out this pen, so I have no idea how it's going to go, but let's see. But before we go to the writing samples, let us have some measurements. When capped, the length of the pen is more or less 14 centimeters. When uncapped, the pen is about 13 centimeters long. And when posted, the pen is about 17.5 centimeters long. The material used to make the body and the cap of this pen is called celluloid derivative, and it's rather light even when the cap is posted and I'm holding it in my hands and I let go of the grip. The pen doesn't fall over the back of my hand. So even if there is a little bit of metal on the cap because of the clip and the trim on the cap, it's not heavy enough to cause the pen to fall over on itself when I let go of the grip. But because I really have very small hands, it really just feels more comfortable for me to write with fountain pens with the caps unposted. Now let us talk about the very interesting filling system of this pen and the single page literature that came with the pen. The filling system was referred to as a baling filler, and when I unscrewed it, it has this very fine, clear plastic tubing, and the other part that screws off is also made of a translucent plastic which has become a little bit yellowish, and it has that sort of pump mechanism that needs to be depressed twice before the entire ink chamber is completely filled with ink. This is the very first time that I am seeing and trying out this kind of filling system, and let's see how it goes. But let me just take a moment to show you the cardboard box of a Noodler's ink that I was telling you about earlier in this video. This is the box for the pen, the long thin one, and the one in my right hand is the box for a bottle of Noodler's ink. That is actually my bottle of Noodler's Jivago, but we are not going to use that particular ink for this pen today. Instead, we are going to use also a Noodler's ink, but this is one that I have only in a vial. This is Noodler's Black Swan in Australian Roses. And what I did is I submerged the entire nib area into that vial and then depressed the plunger twice. And then I saw that I did not pull up any ink at all. So I just did it again. I depressed the plunger once and then another time, and then when I pulled up the plunger a second time, I saw that the ink chamber was reasonably full of ink, so I thought that was it. I did it right the second time. The second time was the charm. From that point on, it was just a matter of screwing the barrel back in with the nib assembly or with the section, and then I busted out once more my Midori MD A5 notebook, which I am using for testing all of the pens in this series, and then when I tried writing it with it, it would not write. I have looked for some reviews of this pen, and I found several of them online, but none of them actually talked about how it needs to be starts or doesn't, or none of them explained how to actually start writing with a pen. So I just shook the pen in order to lodge some of the ink out because air might have been lodged into the nib, and finally after that one shake it started writing. And because it is a flex pen, we should all be able to flex it enough. And I have certainly tried to flex certain fountain pens, but this pen felt a little bit scary to me. Probably because it would not write at all when I tried to write with it the first time. But it is certainly a very, very wet writer, and you can even see the wet ink glistening on the surface of the paper in this camera angle. I think this is one of the pens that will need some getting used to, and once I actually started writing with it, it felt pretty nice. It is very, very smooth. It certainly did not skip, and it deposits a whole lot of ink with every handwriting stroke. Again, a word of warning: when writing with very, very wet fountain pens, we are going to have to wait a little bit longer for the ink to dry on the page before we can do anything else with that page, like turn it over or run our hand over it, or else the handwriting is going to smear. The ink that I am using to test out this pen, I think, is the perfect color match for this pen. It is called Noodler's Black Swan in Australian Roses, and it is an ink that is known for its very pronounced shading qualities, and together with this pen that is a very, very wet writer, I am expecting a lot of shading to show up on this particular writing sample. At this point, I was pretty ready to conclude that I actually want this pen. I think I was just intimidated by the idea that it was a flex pen, and then it had that really, really unusual filling system, and it is a Noodler's pen, and it is named after Captain Ahab, who is a terrifying, terrifying character for me. And all of these things simply converged to sort of scare me, I guess. But really, the test of a good fountain pen is not the name, not even the brand, not the materials that are used in the pen, not the filling system or the color or anything else. The real test of a good fountain pen is how it writes. And when it comes to this particular fountain pen, there is nothing scary about how it writes. It writes beautifully. It is very, very wet. And the only thing that will probably scare you about how this pen writes is that if too much ink on the page actually scares you, because some people prefer dry writers. And I'm not that kind of person. I prefer wet writers, as you all probably know by now. And here once more are my wonky figures of 8. As you can see, everything is so smooth. All of the lines are consistent. Nothing skips at all. And I really think that the very wetness of this pen contributes to the smoothness of how it writes, because the amount of ink that the pen deposits on the paper helps to lubricate the tip of the nib as it glides over the paper. And because it's a flex pen, I tried to flex it. And here is what happened. There was way too much ink that was being deposited onto the page, because even without flexing the pen already writes so wet. So here are the figures of 8 without flexing the pen. You can see the difference right here. And then when I tried to flex the pen even more, it started to railroad. And when it started to do that, I even unscrewed the barrel to check on the ink that is left, because I thought the pen had already run out of ink because it was too wet of a writer. And I saw that it was still full of ink. So I wondered why it started to railroad. Railroading is what we call the phenomenon when that happens. Like, instead of depositing one thick line of ink down onto the paper, instead of that, there are two thin lines of ink that are drawn on the paper. So I just shook the pen again and then deposited a small blob of ink onto the paper and then sopped it up with tissue, and then started writing with the pen again and with the flex. As you can see, I actually don't know how to do it. After trying to write with the pen flexed, it wouldn't write anymore. So I kept on shaking the pen in order to dislodge some of the air bubbles that could have gotten in there, and then the pen writes properly again. Now, if I write normally with a pen without flexing the nib, it is fine. It is a very wet writer, but it writes fine. It actually writes as it's the wettest pen that I have ever tried out. But I still wanted to try out this pen as a flex pen, because obviously this is what the pen was made for. And then when I tried doing it more carefully, I was able to be successful. As you can see from this particular footage, the tines of the nib still open up a little bit, but when I press down a lot on the nib, opening up the tines even more, that's when the railroading happens, and that's when I have to shake the pen again to dislodge some of the air that gets into the pen, and I have to start over. Now, this is probably not the fault of the pen. The fault is probably with me, because I probably don't know how to do this. Well, I am not a calligrapher and I don't use fountain pens for that purpose. I really just use fountain pens for regular daily handwriting, like in my journals and in my planner and in writing lists and notes and drafts. So I don't really need a flex quality fountain pen for that. It's nice to have a flex pen when I need it to flex, like in that penultimate line with the small figures of 8 with a little bit of flex applied to the nib. But if I flex it more than that, then it really doesn't work. This was a rather messy exercise and a lot of ink blobs got onto the paper and onto the surface of the table that I was working on, but that's okay. I actually enjoy doing these things. Now after I shook the pen and dislodged some of the air bubbles and also got some ink blobs onto the paper and onto the surface of the table, the pen writes properly again, and I really just used it like normal, no longer flexing the nib. And when used that way, I really like this pen. I like that it is the wettest pen that I have ever tried out in my entire life so far. I like that with some amount of flex, it delivers thicker lines on the downstroke. I just have to be very careful not to flex it too much so that it will not railroad, and so I would not have to shake the pen and deliver ink blobs all over the place. Now we are currently using the filling system that the pen came with. It is this one. The second way that you can fill this pen is if you remove that entire filling system and just use the pen as an eyedropper. What it means is that you simply not use the plastic thing that screws off, and instead you use an eyedropper or a fountain pen syringe to fill the entire barrel of the pen with ink, and you screw that on instead. It was very interesting to try this pen out. As you can see, the sample page that I worked on ended up being very messy, but just look at that shading on the page. Some of the lines are a darker plum and some of the lines are a lighter plum, and I really like that. That's called shading in fountain pen inks, and it's what characterizes fountain pen writing. You don't get that look from any other pen. As you can see from this close-up right here, it depends on how much ink is deposited onto that particular stroke. Some strokes get more ink than others, and on the strokes that have more ink on them, it dries darker. I think it looks very beautiful, and I think this ink color is extremely beautiful. And I think this is a very messy pen to work with, but I actually like it. I want to buy this pen for myself, and I've already played around with this particular pen, so I'm going to offer to pay for it from Everything Calligraphy. Now, I have said before in a previous video that some fountain pens are worth the extra work and some pens are worth the mess. With this particular pen, I think the mess is certainly worth it. I really like it. I highly recommend this pen. I don't even know how to use a flex pen, and I'm not going to use this pen for its flex properties, but I want to own it anyway. That is how much I love this pen. So check it out from the everythingcalligraphy.com website, which I will link down below. Remember that Everything Calligraphy ships to any point in the Philippines using the private couriers, and they also ship internationally. They also have an ongoing sale for all of December for other items in their store, so make sure you check them out. And that is my review for you today. This is pen number 7 of the 12 pens of Christmas from everythingcalligraphy.com. I will be back tomorrow for pen number 8, so please make sure that you have subscribed to my channel, and make sure that you also click that little bell button so that you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for making this video a part of your last day of 2017. Happy New Year, everyone!